There are betrayals you expect in life. And then there's the moment your own mother looks you in the eye from a witness stand and systematically dismantles your life in front of a judge. All to help your wealthy ex-husband take your son away. She called me a failure. Little did she know. My entire career was built on exposing lies like hers. If you're ready for a story about how the ultimate truth can deliver the ultimate justice, make sure you stick around. The air in my Cleveland apartment always seemed to carry the ghost of last night's dinner and the promise of tonight's. That evening, it was the humble, slightly chemical scent of boxed macaroni and cheese, a smell that had become synonymous with my life as a single mom. I scraped the last of the bright orange pasta from the pot into a bowl for my 8-year-old son. Leo. He sat at our small, wobbly kitchen table, a relic from a thrift store. His brow knitted in the kind of deep concentration only a third-grade math problem can inspire. The rhythmic scratch of his pencil on cheap paper was the room's only soundtrack. A sound more grounding to me than any symphony. I just don't get it. Mom. He sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. He pushed a lock of unruly brown hair from his eyes, leaving a faint graphite smudge on his forehead. Why are there so many steps? I pulled one of our mismatched chairs beside him, the legs groaning in protest. The warmth from his small body was a comfort. I leaned in, my world shrinking to the size of that single sheet of paper. You're so close. Sweetie, I murmured, my finger tracing the numbers. You just forgot to carry the one. See, it's like a little secret number you have to remember to add right here. I tapped the spot. A wave of understanding washed over his face, replaced by a triumphant grin. In that small victory, in that shared moment under the dim kitchen light, my entire universe felt complete and unshakably secure. This was the life I had meticulously built, brick by unassuming brick. A quiet, 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood of hardworking families. A life filled with secondhand furniture, worn-out library books, and a budget stretched thin enough to be transparent. To Leo, I was simply mom. A mom who braided her own hair, who drove a 15-year-old car that sounded like a coffee grinder, who disappeared each day to a quiet, nondescript office job that paid the bills and nothing more. It was a life of profound and deliberate simplicity, an elaborate stage play where I was both the lead actress and the playwright. And the only audience that mattered was my son. After I tucked Leo into bed, his breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of sleep, I walked back into the living room. The silence felt different now, heavier. I closed the door to his room, and with that soft click, the character of just mom receded. In her place stood someone else, someone I kept hidden from the world, and especially from him. I walked over to the corner where my old leather briefcase sat. It was scuffed at the edges, the brass latches tarnished with age, a stark contrast to the sleek, modern briefcases my ex-husband, Mark, favored. To him, it had been a symbol of my lack of ambition. To me, it was a vault. With practiced fingers, I opened the latches. The contents were not resume or unpaid bills. They were thick, heavy stacks of legal documents, their edges sharp, their headers stamped with the stark, red ink of the state confidential. I pulled out a file for an upcoming appellate court case, a dizzyingly complex dispute between 2 tech giants. My posture straightened. The weariness in my shoulders from a long day of pretending seemed to evaporate. My gaze, normally soft and maternal, sharpened into a precise, analytical focus. The dim light of the single lamp cast long shadows across the room, and in the dark reflection of the window, I could almost see 2 different women staring back. One was the mother in a faded sweater. The other was the professional who could dictate the course of fortunes and futures. The irony was a constant, bitter companion. I spent my nights here, in this small apartment, making decisions that impacted thousands of lives and millions of dollars. All so I could afford to live a life that looked like I could afford nothing. The next morning arrived with the obnoxious blare of a luxury car horn. Mark, punctual to a fault. A trait he used not for efficiency, but for intimidation. I glanced out the window and saw his polished black Mercedes idling behind my dented, rust-flecked Honda. The contrast was almost comical. A perfect visual summary of our separate worlds. When I opened the door, he was leaning against the frame, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. He surveyed my hallway, his gaze lingering on a small scuff mark on the wall, his lips curling into a barely perceptible sneer. "Dad," Leo shouted, running past me for a hug. Mark embraced him, but his critical eyes remained on me. "Angie," he said, his voice a low, condescending murmur. "This place, it's looking a little rough around the edges. Don't you think?" He then gestured vaguely towards the parking lot. "And that car? Seriously, it's a safety hazard." It's embarrassing for Leo to be seen in it. Before I could form a response, he produced a large, glossy box from behind his back. "But hey, I got you something to cheer you up, buddy." It was the new, mega-sized Lego starship. The one Leo stared at every time we went to the store. The one I'd promised we could save up for together. A lesson in patience and hard work. Mark had just nullified that lesson with a swipe of his credit card. I watched Leo's face light up. A joy so pure, it was painful. Because I knew it was a joy I couldn't have given him today. It was another calculated move in Mark's long game of proving I was inadequate. I forced a smile. A practiced, hollow thing I had perfected over the years. I told myself, again, that this was the price of normalcy for my son. This constant, simmering humiliation was a tax I paid to keep him safe from the complexities and dangers of my real life. The silence in the apartment after they left was deafening. It was then, of course, that my phone rang. The screen displayed a smiling photo of my mother, Eleanor. I let it ring 3 times, composing myself before answering. "Angelina, darling, I was just thinking about you," she began, her voice a cascade of saccharine sweetness. "Hi. Mom. Everything's fine. Is it? Honey, you sound tired. Are you eating properly? I worry." I was just on the phone with Brenda, Mark's mother. You know, she was telling me Mark is about to close another huge deal. He's taking all his top people to Hawaii to celebrate. He is such a provider. A real man. Each word was a carefully aimed dart. "Oh. And how is your little project going?" She never called it a job. It was always a project. A hobby. Something insignificant. "It's fine, Mom." "Well, I just think it's a shame," she sighed, the sound crackling over the line. "A woman needs stability. She needs to be taken care of. You had that, and you just walked away. I don't think you understand how much you gave up." A sudden, vivid memory ambushed me. I was 24, standing on a vast lawn in a heavy black graduation robe, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and parental pride. I was holding my law degree, graduating with the highest honors. My mother hugged me, her perfume cloying, and whispered directly into my ear, her voice drowning out the applause. "This is lovely. Dear. Now you can find a successful husband." That was it. My years of relentless work, sleepless nights, and academic triumphs, all reduced to a stepping stone for matrimony. I ended the call with a clipped, "I have to go. Mom." My throat tight. I felt that same old frustration, the feeling of being in a soundproof room, screaming, with no one able to hear me. Un moment later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was from the state judiciary. The subject, Urgent Judicial Ethics Committee Meeting Materials. I opened it, scanned the first few lines of a complex ethical dilemma, and then, out of a deeply ingrained habit of self-preservation, I deleted it. No traces. No connections. That evening, as Leo and I were curled on the couch watching a movie, a sharp, official-sounding knock echoed through the apartment. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I opened the door to a tired-looking man who thrust a thick manila envelope into my hands. "For Angelina Hayes," he muttered. And then he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the hall. My hands felt numb as I closed the door. I knew what it was before I even opened it. The stiff paper, the dense, emotionless font. It was a formal petition, filed by Mark, demanding sole and permanent custody of our son, Leo. I sank onto the couch, the cheerful sounds from the cartoon suddenly feeling mocking and cruel. My eyes scanned the pages, and the words began to blur together. Each one a calculated strike. He painted a picture of my life as one of chaos and neglect, financially unstable. One line read, "Source of income is mysterious and unverifiable." Said another, "The mother's secretive lifestyle and inability to provide a stable, suitable home environment poses a significant risk to the child's well-being." He was using my secrets against me. He was taking the quiet, simple life I had sacrificed so much to build and twisting it into a weapon of my own destruction. My heart hammered against my ribs. A wild, trapped bird. I flipped through the pages, through financial demands and character assassinations, a roaring in my ears. I thought I had reached the absolute bottom, the deepest level of his betrayal. And then I turned to the final page. It was the proposed witness list. A list of people prepared to stand in a court of law and testify that I was an unfit mother. I saw the names of his business partners, his family members, and then, at the very end of the list, typed in the same cold, black ink as all the other lies, was the last name. It was listed under the heading Character Witness. The name was Mrs. Eleanor Price. My mother. The paper slipped from my fingers. The air rushed out of my lungs. For a long, silent moment, the entire world seemed to stop spinning, and the floor simply fell away beneath me. The legal document slipped from my nerveless fingers and fluttered to the worn carpet, landing face down as if in shame. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound in the apartment was the cheerful, nonsensical theme song of the cartoon Leo had left playing on the television. The air in my lungs felt thick and heavy. Impossible to breathe. It was one thing to be betrayed by an ex-husband whose cruelty had become a predictable, dull ache. It was another thing entirely to see that betrayal co-signed in cold, black ink by my own mother. My first coherent thought was a desperate, grasping hope that it was a mistake, a cruel, typographical error, a tactic of Mark's, perhaps, listing her name without her consent to intimidate me. He was capable of that. But my mother, she had always been critical, always dismissive of my choices. But this felt like a different universe of cruelty. This was not just a lack of support, this was an act of war. My hands, still trembling, found my phone. I scrolled to her contact photo, the one of her smiling brightly in a garden, and pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. A shrill, piercing sound in the suffocating silence. She answered with that same chipper, oblivious tone she always used. Angelina. Honey, I was just about to call you. I found the most wonderful recipe for pot roast. I'll send it to you. The sheer, staggering normalcy of it stole my voice. I couldn't speak. Honey, are you there? I finally managed to push a single, ragged word out. Why? The silence on her end was brief. But it was heavy. Telling. When she spoke again, the chipper veneer had been replaced by a practiced, sorrowful tone. The one she used when she wanted to deliver a criticism wrapped in the guise of maternal concern. Oh, darling. You saw the papers. Then, I was hoping Mark would talk to you first. Why? Mom, I repeated. My voice barely a whisper. The room was starting to feel cold. Angelina. You have to understand. I am doing this for Leo, she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy. He deserves the best. He deserves stability. A big house with a yard. All the things Mark can give him. It's not personal. Honey, it's about what's right for my grandson. What's right? I finally found a flicker of heat in the ice spreading through my veins. You think what's right is to stand up in a court of law and help him take my son away from me, based on what the car I drive, the size of my apartment. It's not just that. And you know it, she said, her voice hardening slightly, the mask of concern slipping. It's your whole life. It's secretive. You disappear for hours. You're always tired. You have no real career to speak of. Mark has a legacy. What do you have? Angelina, I'm sorry. But someone has to be the adult here. I couldn't form a reply. The chasm that had always existed between us, the one I had spent my entire life trying to bridge, had just become an uncrossable canyon. She wasn't just on his side, she was an architect of his attack. I ended the call without another word. The soft click of the phone echoing like a gunshot in the silent apartment. The hope for a mistake was gone, replaced by the chilling, absolute certainty of the betrayal. In the days that followed, Mark and my mother began to execute their strategy with a quiet, sickening efficiency. Mark launched a subtle but relentless campaign on social media. Photos appeared on his profile of him and Leo on a weekend trip, smiling on a sailboat, the water sparkling behind them. Another showed Leo beaming as he unboxed a new, top-of-the-line gaming console in a living room that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Each post was a carefully curated tableau of wealth and happiness. A silent, public judgment on the life I provided. Meanwhile, my mother worked the family channels. My Aunt Carol called, her voice full of pity. Eleanor told me you were having a hard time. Dear, if you need a little money to tide you over. My cousin called next, suggesting a more stable career path. Like being a receptionist. The narrative they were weaving was suffocating. In the eyes of my own family, I was now officially a charity case. A struggling, unstable woman on the verge of collapse. I was being erased and replaced by a caricature they had created. A few days later, my best friend, Sarah, showed up at my door with a pizza and a bottle of wine. She took one look at my face and set the boxes down on the counter. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "What did he do?" I told her everything. I told her about the custody papers, the allegations, and then the final, devastating blow of my mother's name on the witness list. Sarah listened, her expression shifting from sympathy to a furious, protective anger. "That is monstrous," she breathed, shaking her head. "Absolutely monstrous. They are painting a picture of you, Angie, a completely false one. And right now, you're letting them hold the brush. You can't let them do this. You have to fight back. You have to tell your own story." Her words hung in the air long after she left. Tell your own story. For 8 years, I had done the exact opposite. I had hidden my story, buried it under layers of simplicity and secrecy, all for what I thought was the greater good. Now, that carefully constructed silence was being used to strangle me. The final push came late one afternoon. An email arrived from Mark's lawyer, James Crawford. The subject line was confidential settlement offer. My hands felt slick as I opened it. It was a formal, legal document, laying out Mark's generous offer. He would provide a substantial financial settlement, a 6-figure sum, and waive all his legal fees. In exchange, I would voluntarily relinquish primary physical custody of Leo, effective immediately. I would be granted supervised visitation every other weekend. The insult was so profound, so utterly dehumanizing. It transcended anger and landed somewhere cold and silent. He wasn't trying to win a custody battle. He was trying to buy my son. He believed my love, my motherhood, had a price tag, and he had the audacity to think he could afford it. That was the moment something inside me broke. Or perhaps it was the moment something new was forged. That night, I didn't work on my legal files. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat on my second-hand couch in the deepening darkness, the city lights painting faint, shifting patterns on the wall. The hurt was still there. A rough, gaping wound. But beneath it, something else was stirring. It was a feeling I recognized. A feeling I hadn't allowed myself to access in my personal life for a very, very long time. It was the cold, clear, and focused resolve of my professional self. They had mistaken my patience for weakness. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. They had judged my life based on a carefully crafted illusion. And now they were going to be judged by the truth. I would not just defend myself against their lies. I would dismantle their entire reality. I would stop playing the part of the struggling single mom and start acting like who I really was. I got up, walked over to my laptop, and opened a new document. I wasn't writing a defense. I was drafting a strategy. On one side of the screen, I listed every single one of their allegations: financially unstable, no verifiable career, lives in a substandard home. On the other side, I began to type my rebuttal. But my rebuttal wouldn't be words or arguments. It would be facts. Hard, undeniable, and utterly devastating facts. The most critical part of my plan required a phone call I had never imagined making. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked up the private number. It felt like crossing a sacred, invisible line, mixing my chaotic personal world with the hallowed halls of my professional one. But they had left me no choice. I took a deep, steadying breath and dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and authoritative. Even over the phone. Barrett. Chief Justice Barrett. This is Angelina Hayes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I apologize for calling you at this hour. I know this is highly unusual. Judge Hayes, he replied, a note of concern in his voice. Is everything all right? I'm facing a delicate personal situation. Sire, I said, choosing my words with extreme care. One that has unfortunately found its way into a legal forum. It requires a clarification of my professional standing, delivered by an unimpeachable source. I explained the barest, a most necessary details of the custody hearing, without any of the emotional turmoil. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he would refuse. Then, he spoke. What you're describing is a gross misrepresentation of a dedicated public servant. Tell me the time and the place. Judge, I will be there. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. After I hung up, I walked over to my printer. I printed out my last 3 years of pay stubs. I printed out the deeds to the downtown penthouse I secretly owned but never lived in, and the small cabin in the mountains I hadn't visited in over a year. I gathered copies of my most significant published legal opinions, the ones that had shaped state law. I placed every single document into my old, scuffed leather briefcase. The object Mark and my mother had so often mocked was no longer just a container for my secret life. It was now an arsenal. The day before Mark was scheduled to pick up Leo, I made one final, strategic move. I stopped at a bookstore and bought a paperback copy of a book titled Finding Your Career Path After 35. I left it sitting on the coffee table, its cover bright and embarrassingly optimistic. When Mark arrived, his eyes immediately fell on it. A slow, smug smile spread across his face. He thought he had me figured out completely. He thought he was watching a woman in desperate, pathetic decline. That evening, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. Ms. Hayes. A slick, confident voice said, "This is James Crawford. Mr. Sterling's attorney. I know who you are." "Good," he said, the smugness palpable even through the phone. "Listen. My client wants to give you one last chance to do the right thing for your son and avoid a truly humiliating public display. He is willing to increase his settlement offer by 10%. Take the deal. Ms. Hayes. It's the only win you're going to get." I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. My city. In one of those tall, gleaming buildings was my real office. My real life. A life they knew nothing about. A deep, cold calm settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a certainty that was as sharp and clear as glass. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Crawford," I said, my voice even and quiet. "But we won't be needing it." I could almost hear his baffled silence. "I'll see you in court." I ended the call before he could reply. The final, satisfying click sealing their fate. The game was no longer theirs to play. It was mine. And I knew the rules far better than they ever could. Chắc chắn rồi. Đây là chương 3. Tiếp tục ngay sau cuộc điện thoại đầy thách thức, đưa câu chuyện đến đỉnh điểm căng thẳng trong phòng xử án. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with the kind of deliberate care I usually reserved for a major legal argument. I chose a simple, dark navy suit conservative, unassuming, and utterly forgettable. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun, a style I hadn't worn since I first started my career. I wanted to look exactly like the person they had described in their legal filings, a woman stretched thin, clinging to a fading sense of professionalism. I was not just playing a part, I was embodying their delusion, giving them the satisfaction of seeing their fiction made flesh. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a tired, anxious woman on the verge of losing everything. It was the perfect camouflage. The family courtroom was exactly as I remembered from my early days as a young lawyer, stuffy, smelling faintly of stale coffee and desperation, with poor lighting that seemed to cast everyone in a guilty hue. Mark was already there, seated beside his lawyer, James Crawford. He looked confident, relaxed, whispering to Crawford with a smirk playing on his lips. On the benches behind them sat his family, a unified front of smug, judgmental faces, and next to his mother, looking small but resolute, was my own, Eleanor. She met my gaze for a fleeting second, her expression a practiced mask of sorrow, before looking away. My side of the courtroom was painfully empty, save for Sarah, who gave me a tight, encouraging nod. The emptiness was a deliberate choice. I had told my few friends and supportive colleagues not to come. This was not a battle I could win with emotional support. It had to be won with cold, hard facts. Their presence would only complicate the clean, brutal lines of the strategy I had laid out. The proceedings began. The air grew thick with legalese as Crawford laid out his case. He painted a masterful, damning portrait of my life. He presented photos of my small apartment, of my old car. He spoke of my unverifiable employment, my unstable income, and my secretive nature, framing my fierce protection of my son's privacy as the erratic behavior of someone with something to hide. With every word, I could feel the invisible weight of the judge's skepticism growing. I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my expression neutral. I let him build his pyre of lies, piece by damning piece, knowing that the bigger the fire, the more spectacularly it would eventually be extinguished. Then, Crawford called his first character witness. The petitioner calls Mrs. Eleanor Price to the stand. My mother walked slowly towards the witness stand, her movements frail and deliberate. She was playing the part of the heartbroken matriarch forced to make an impossible choice. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore the oath, her voice trembling slightly for dramatic effect. Crawford began his questioning gently. Mrs. Price, you are Angelina Hayes's mother. Is that correct? Yes, she whispered. And you are here today because you are concerned for the welfare of your grandson, Leo? Deeply concerned, she said, dabbing at her eye with a handkerchief. It's the only reason I would ever do something like this. For the next 20 minutes, I listened as the woman who gave birth to me systematically dismantled my life. She spoke of my instability after the divorce, my troubling secrecy. She recounted times I had to cancel plans because of work emergencies that I could never explain, framing my dedication as flakiness, my responsibilities as irresponsibility. She painted me as a struggling, lust soul, incapable of providing the structure and resources a young boy needed. And what about her financial situation? Mrs. Price Crawford asked, his voice dripping with sympathy. My mother sighed. A heavy, theatrical sound. She can barely make ends meet. She tries so hard, but she's proud. She'd never admit it. There have been times I've had to help her out with groceries, a bill here and there. How can she give a child what he needs when she can't even provide for herself? It was a breathtaking lie, delivered with the conviction of a seasoned actress. Mark looked on, Nodding gravely, the judge, a stern-faced woman named Patricia Morrison, whom I knew only by reputation, was taking meticulous notes. Her expression unreadable. Crawford moved in for the kill. And in your opinion, as his grandmother, do you believe your grandson would be in a better, more stable environment if his father, Mr. Sterling, were granted sole custody? My mother looked directly at me then. Her eyes filled with a chillingly convincing imitation of regret. As much as it pains me to say it about my own daughter, yes, I do. Mark can give Leo the world. Angelina. She can barely give him a roof over his head. She stepped down from the stand, avoiding my eyes, and returned to her seat next to Mark's mother, who squeezed her hand in solidarity. James Crawford stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, the evidence is clear and the testimony is heartbreakingly consistent. We have a mother who, while perhaps well-intentioned, is financially unstable, emotionally volatile, and secretive to the point of concern. On the other hand, we have a father who is a pillar of the community, financially secure, and able to provide a stable, loving home. The question before this court is simple: do we choose stability or chaos for this child? The choice is clear. He sat down. The picture of victory. The room was silent. I could feel Sarah's desperate gaze on me, urging me to say something, to fight. Judge Morrison turned her attention to me. Her gaze was cool, appraising. Ms. Hayes, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. You have heard the petitioner's arguments and the testimony of your mother. Do you have anything to say in your defense? This was the moment, the pivot upon which my entire future and my son's would turn. I rose slowly to my feet, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. The fear and hurt had been burned away, leaving only a cold, diamond-hard clarity. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and carrying easily through the silent courtroom. I do. I would like to call a rebuttal witness. Crawford shot to his feet. Objection. The defense submitted no witness list. This witness's availability was only confirmed this morning. Your Honor, I replied, my gaze fixed on the judge. His testimony is directly relevant to the petitioner's claims regarding my character, my stability, and my profession. It is critical to establishing the truth. Judge Morrison considered this for a moment. Her eyes narrowed. I'll allow it, she said finally, with a rap of her gavel. But this is highly irregular. Ms. Hayes, this witness had better be as critical as you claim. He is, Your Honor, I said. I turned and looked towards the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the bailiff standing there. He opened the doors. I called to the stand. I announced, my voice ringing with an authority that made Mark and my mother flinch. The Honorable Chief Justice William Barrett of the State Supreme Court. A collective gasp swept through the room. The silence that followed was absolute. A vacuum of pure shock. James Crawford's jaw literally dropped. Mark's face went from smug to confused to utterly horrified in the span of 3 seconds. But the most profound reaction came from my mother. Her face, which had been a mask of sorrowful duty, crumbled into a mess of pale, slakjavid panits. Chief Justice Barrett entered the courtroom. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and an air of unimpeachable integrity. He moved with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. As he walked down the aisle, every eye was on him. He stepped up to the witness stand and took the oath, his deep, resonant voice filling the stunned silence. I walked to the lectern, my movements measured and calm. My old briefcase sat on the floor beside it. Chief Justice Barrett, I began. Thank you for being here. Could you please state your relationship to me for the court? Judge Angelina Hayes is a colleague, he said, his gaze sweeping over the room before settling on me. She is one of the most respected appellate judges in this state. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. I saw Judge Morrison's eyes widen slightly. Crawford was frantically shuffling through his papers as if they might contain some explanation for this reality-shattering event. And how long have you served on the state Supreme Court together? I asked. I had the honor of swearing her in myself 8 years ago, he replied. My mother made a small, strangled sound. 8 years. 8 years of her calling my life's work a little project. Your Honor, I continued, could you describe the nature of my work? The petitioner has raised concerns about my unreliable and secretive employment. Justice Barrett allowed a faint, dry smile to touch his lips. Judge Hayes presides over some of the most complex and sensitive cases that come before the court. She currently sits on the state's Judicial Ethics Committee, which I chair. She was the author of the majority opinion in the landmark State v. Dawson case, which fundamentally changed parental rights law in this state. Her work isn't just reliable, it is foundational. I glanced at Mark. The color had drained from his face. He, who had always called my work boring, I was now learning that my boring job shaped the very laws he was trying to use against me. And finally, Justice Barrett. The petitioner has made serious allegations regarding my financial instability. Are you familiar with the compensation for a judge at this level? I am, he said, his voice booming with authority. The annual salary for a state Supreme Court justice is $195,000, not including benefits or investments. To suggest Judge Hayes is financially unstable is, to be blunt, absurd. I let his words hang in the air. A final? Definitive demolition of their entire case. I looked at my mother, whose face was a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. I looked at Mark, who seemed to have shrunk in his expensive suit. And I looked at James Crawford, a high-priced lawyer who had just learned the fatal error of not doing his homework. I turned back to the bench, my gaze meeting Judge Morrison's. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a look of profound, dawning respect. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady and strong. I would now like to give my closing statement. I stood at the lectern, the worn wood cool beneath my fingertips. The stunned silence of the courtroom was a physical presence, a thick blanket that absorbed all sound. Chief Justice Barrett had returned to his seat in the gallery. His purpose served, leaving me alone in the space he had cleared. Every eye was on me, the shocked and betrayed eyes of my mother. The dawning, horrified comprehension in Mark's, and the sharp, newly respectful gaze of Judge Morrison. My voice, when I spoke, did not tremble. It was the voice I used on the bench, calm, measured, and stripped of all but the essential truth. Your Honor, I began, addressing Judge Morrison directly. For the past 8 years, since the day I was appointed to the bench, I have lived 2 separate lives. It was not a choice I made out of shame, or deceit, or instability. It was a choice I made out of love. I paused, letting the words settle. I grew up understanding that, in my family, value was measured by external things, wealth, status, the right marriage. I did not want that life for my son. I wanted Leo to grow up in a world where his worth, and the worth of others, was judged by character, kindness, and integrity. So I made a choice. I built a wall between my professional life and my personal life. I bought a small apartment in a normal neighborhood. I drove a 15-year-old car. I wore simple clothes. I did this so my son could have a childhood free from the long shadow of a parent's public position. I did it so he could be a kid, not a judge's son. I wanted him to learn the value of a dollar earned through hard work, not the entitlement of a dollar, simply given. My gaze drifted from the judge to Mark. My ex-husband saw this choice not as a sacrifice, but as a failure. He saw my simple life and judged it as proof of my inadequacy, because his own self-worth is so completely tied to the things he owns and the image he projects. Then, my eyes found my mother's. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. But the deepest hurt, I said, my voice softening with a genuine rough sorrow, is that the people who should have known me best never once questioned the illusion. They never asked about my work. They never showed curiosity about my life beyond what they could see on the surface. They simply saw what they wanted to see, a daughter who had failed to live up to their materialistic standards. They built a narrative of my failure because it fit their own worldview. And then they came into this sacred space and swore to that fiction under oath. I turned back to Judge Morrison, my voice regaining its formal strength. My entire career, Your Honor, has been dedicated to one thing: protecting children and upholding the integrity of the family. I have written laws and handed down rulings that affect thousands of families across this state, always with the child's best interest as my unwavering guide. The accusation that I am unfit to raise my own child is not merely a personal insult. It is an insult to my life's work and to every family I have sworn an oath to protect. I am not asking for the court's favor. I am asking for a ruling based on the truth that has been so clearly established today. I ask for sole custody of my son, so that I may continue to raise him with the values of honesty and integrity, values that have been so painfully absent from the petitioner's case. I took my seat. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer shocked, it was contemplative. Final. Judge Morrison looked down at the mountain of false evidence Mark's lawyer had presented. Then she looked at me. She removed her glasses and set them down on the bench. In my 15 years in family court, she said, her voice sharp and clear, I have seen a great deal of conflict. I have seen anger. And I have seen grief. But rarely have I seen a case so thoroughly built on a foundation of malicious fiction and willful ignorance. The petitioner has not only wasted this court's valuable time, but has done so in an attempt to manipulate the legal system for the purpose of punishing a former spouse. She looked directly at Mark. Mr. Sterling, your attempts to portray Ms. Tachens Hayes as an unfit mother are not only baseless, they are deeply disturbing. You have used your financial advantage as a weapon, and you have coerced a family member into perjuring herself on your behalf. Her gaze flickered to my mother, who visibly flinched. The court's decision is therefore immediate, Judge Morrison declared. Her gavel held ready. Sole legal and physical custody of the minor child, Leo Hayes, is hereby granted to his mother, Judge Angelina Hayes. Visitation for the father, Mr. Sterling, will be supervised, pending his successful completion of a court-mandated parenting and anger management course. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp, definitive crack that echoed through the room. It was over. For a moment, no one moved. Then, the spell broke. James Crawford quickly began packing his briefcase. Avoiding eye contact with anyone, Mark shot up from his chair, his face a mask of furious disbelief, and stormed out of the courtroom without a backward glance. His family scurried after him like frightened mice. My mother remained, frozen in her seat. As I gathered my own briefcase, my old, scuffed, vindicated briefcase, she approached me, her face pale and blotchy. "Angelina," she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't know. I never imagined. "I'm so sorry." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just a vast, quiet emptiness where my love for her used to be. The wound was too deep. The betrayal too absolute for an apology to ever reach it. "The words you said on that stand." "Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Those were the words you chose. The person you described. That was the daughter you saw. You didn't know because you never cared enough to ask. That is your truth. Now you have to live with it." I turned my back on her and walked out of the courtroom, leaving her standing alone in the wreckage of the lies she had helped build. The bright hallway felt like a different world. Sarah was there, her face streaked with tears of relief, and standing beside her, holding her hand, was Leo. Sarah had brought him for the verdict. His face was a mixture of confusion and awe. He ran to me, and I dropped to my knees, wrapping him in a hug so tight I thought I might never let go. I buried my face in his hair, breathing in the simple, clean scent of my son, my little boy, my whole world. He pulled back and looked at me, his brow furrowed with the one question that mattered. "Mom," he asked, his voice small, "why did you never tell me you were a judge?" I cupped his face in my hands, looking into his clear, honest eyes. "Because, my sweet boy," I said, my own voice thick with emotion, "I wanted you to love me for being your mom, not for what I do, or what I have, but just for being me." A slow smile spread across his face. "But it's still pretty cool," he whispered. 6 months later, the world had settled into a new, truer shape. We no longer lived in the small apartment. We lived in the penthouse, a place filled with light and air, with a view that stretched across the entire city. Mark had completed his parenting classes. His visits with Leo were awkward. He supervised affairs in public places, filled with forced conversation and expensive gifts that Leo was quickly losing interest in. The connection between them, once propped up by money and power, was proving to be hollow at its core. My mother had called, texted, and written letters. I had answered none of them. Some breaks are too clean to be mended. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Leo and I were in the living room. I brought out my old leather briefcase and set it on the large coffee table. "You know," I said, "I've never really shown you what's inside here." His eyes lit up with curiosity. I opened the tarnished latches. This time, I didn't pull out complex legal files. I pulled out my judicial robe and let him feel the heavy fabric. I showed him pictures of the Supreme Court building. I explained, in the simple terms an 8-year-old could understand, what my job was: to listen to stories, to find the truth, and to make sure the rules were fair for everyone, especially for kids who needed protecting. The briefcase, once a symbol of my fractured identity, was now a bridge between my two worlds, a treasure chest of stories I could finally share with my son. As I sat there, watching the wonder in his eyes, I understood the final, profound lesson of the ordeal. Hiding my accomplishments, dimming my own light to make others comfortable, hadn't protected anyone. It had only given permission to those who wanted to see me as small to believe it was true. My strength wasn't something to be hidden away. It was something to be lived, to be shared, to be owned. The following Monday morning, I stood in my chambers, pulling on the heavy black robe. It no longer felt like a costume for a different person. It felt like my own skin. I looked at my reflection in the dark wood of the door, not a mother, not a judge, but both, a whole person. Finally at peace, I walked out of my chambers, through the marble hallway, and pushed open the doors to my courtroom. I stepped up to the bench, my steps sure and steady, ready to deliver justice. My own, at long last, had been served.